Taxi drivers at Reddit, have anyone actually jumped into your taxi and screamed follow that car? If yes, what happened? I was in New Orleans once and a cab I was in got sideswiped by a drunk driver. The drunk driver then took off. I told the cab to follow him, which he did. We ended up in a parking lot and we watched them go into an apartment building. Cabbie had the station call the cops. I wrote a statement for the cabbie and he called me a new cab while he wanted for the cops. You are a good person. You spent your own time to help a complete stranger. He called me a new cab. Call me a new cab. Call me an old bus. Just don't call me late for dinner. You are a new cab. I have been called worse. I drove a taxi one summer in a party resort. One night, two guys jumped in and yelled follow that car, which was another taxi that I knew the driver of and I obliged. Turns out, one of their mates was drunk AF and decided to just go to their hotel without telling them. They only saw the guy leaving the club drunk and they thought he was going to a strip club without them. He was actually going to their hotel, as he was hammered. Another time 3 girls jumped in the car and said follow that car. The car in question was a black sedan, tinted back windows. Yet wasn't that shady imho. We follow the car for 15 minutes, leaving the resort going into a forest. The girls start freaking out, as one of their friends, also a girl, was seen stepping into that car. Yeah, turns out that she just hooked up with some guy in the club they were earlier and she was about to suck his D when we pulled up next to them. Weirdest summer. Honestly, those are good friends. They were just making sure she was safe. Bro, I was on the phone with my friend in a taxi when a random guy hopped in and yelled follow that motherfucking rapist now. I got out as soon as possible. I don't know what happened after that, but that guy was so pissed. Now that I think about it, this happened 3 years ago and I just recently remembered it. 1999 bizarre summer. I followed the car. It stopped in a suburban house. Dude went into the house. They were his family and didn't have room for him with them. What a roller coaster. How do you drive a cab with such short arms? Well, that was anticlimactic. Am I the only one who doesn't understand this story at all? Whose family was it? What relation was dude to your passenger? I did that once as a passenger. We said it as a joke. We were in a group of 6 and couldn't fit in a single cab. So I went into the second cab and said, follow that cab. We expected the driver to laugh it off and ask for our destination. Instead, he just took off and followed the first cab. He'd been waiting for that moment. I hope you said you never saw us. Okay. Then tipped him a honey, or 15%. I'm guessing the cab driver probably just takes it as I am going to the same destination as the rest of my group in that other cab and not I am in the middle of an action thriller. Keep your head on a swivel. I asked a taxi driver that question many years back. He said that happened on 2 separate occasions and both times, a wife was trying to catch her cheating husband committing adultery. Update: I have been getting a lot of comments on whether the husband cheated on the wife twice. I'm not sure about that, but the story that I was told was 2 different couples. Also, one of the wives actually caught her husband meeting his mistress. And? Did she? But will you feel better, he said with a sigh, to know what he's doing? To see with your eye? To wait and to watch as he wanders ahead? To chase and to face and to catch him, he said. It isn't important, the how, the who. Why hurt yourself looking? What good will it do? Let's make the decision to turn away quick. What say you? She whispered. Dot. I'll cut off his dick. What are the chances that she'd be in hot pursuit of her cheating husband and she flags down the same taxi driver both times? Incredible. I used to ride a pedicab, bicycle taxi, in New York City. A drunk finance bro told me to follow his friend who was running away. I caught him in about a block and a half. The bro jumps out of my trike not paying and tackles his friend. He then comes back to me and gives me $40. Holy shit. I lived in New York for 30 years and I thought they were petty cabs. Like petty theft. As in not as good big as real cabs. Fuck. Edit. Yes. Petty equals little. Former pedicab here too. You run into crazy shit when your main clientele are wasted, haha. Oh, is that what they are called? The ones here are labeled boobers. Because, Bike Ubers. Friend of mine is a taxi driver and this has happened to him. An elderly man rushed inside his taxi and pointed out loud to follow a red Toyota. This man never explains why to follow, just tries to frantically call to somewhere. My friend asked multiple times if they need to call police, but the man just waved no and pointed to follow the car. They circle around the town, finally ending up to the front of a house where the car followed parks. As the car stop, man says hold on a moment, I'll pay, and jumps out of the car. An elderly lady steps out of the red Toyota and the man, apparently her husband, starts to scream, "Why did you left me at the mall?" Woman is waving her hands screaming back, "What are you screaming about? You are here," and walks inside the house like nothing has happened. Man returns and pays the drive, being sorry about it all at the same time. My friend thought they were following a burglar or something, but it turned out the lady just forgot her husband at the mall. Funny situation in a way, but sad in a way too, as my friend said. Dementia. Edit. Sleepy typos. What are you screaming about? You are here. Can't argue with that. This one is my favorite. That's absolutely hilarious. Instead of saying to the mall, say at the mall. This sort of happened to me about 20 years ago. Not a taxi driver, although I was driving down a main road and saw a dude running around with a baseball bat, and then come cop cars parked on a side street. Young me decided that I want to get involved, so I pulled down the side street and found a cop on foot a good distance away from his car. I told him about baseball bat guy and he gets on his radio. Guess he got an immediate update on his radio, looks at how far he is from his car and he says, "Can you drive me down the road?" I'm thinking fuck yeah, and tell him to jump in. He does, and I am seriously driving around back roads with a cop riding shotgun giving me directions while on his radio. Only lasted for about 2 minutes and then he jumps out to pursue the guy on foot. Not a very satisfying ending to the story, since I never found out what happened. But damn it, that's my story. My story isn't a follow that car but is similar to yours, so I'll post it under yours. I got hit by a drunk driver who ran a red light. My car was totaled and my passenger was sent to the hospital in an ambulance. A cop at the scene said he would give me a ride to the hospital once they got my car towed and the scene cleaned up, since it was like 3 AM and cold outside. We go to leave and I sit in the back of the car, not in handcuffs or anything, just chilling like I was riding in a cab, making small talk with the cop about the accident. As we are driving, he hears something on the radio and immediately tells me hang on. I gotta respond to this and then hits the lights and sirens and starts speeding big time. We pull into an alleyway and he's unbuckling to jump out before the car even stops moving and he yells back at me, "Stay down. You're not supposed to be in my car. Just stay down and don't get up until I come back." Then he gets out. I peek and he's got his gun out and it's clear he's chasing after someone on foot. He disappears into the darkness and I hear gunshots, sirens, and other cop cars pull up. Nobody notices me because they are so busy with whatever is going on. I was a little worried, like, WTF, did this cop just get killed while I'm hiding in the backseat of his car? But luckily after about 10 minutes he came back to the car, just fine, and we continued our drive to the hospital. He explained that someone was running from the cops and he was the only car near enough to try to cut them off, and he basically chased the guy back toward the original cops. When the suspect realized he was cornered, he pulled out a weapon and exchanged a couple shots with one of the original cops before being tased and caught. It didn't sound like anyone was hurt, which is good. However, the cop giving me a ride was really freaked out. On the way back to the hospital he kept going on about how he shouldn't have been giving me a ride, how he would be in huge trouble if he or I had been hurt in the encounter. I felt bad about accepting what was supposed to be a short ride, and you could tell he was really feeling like I thought giving this kid a ride was the right thing to do, but now I realize why we aren't allowed to do this. Someone could have been hurt or killed. When he let me out of the cop car at the hospital I thanked him and he just said if anyone ever asks how you go to the hospital, you walked, and I agreed. I figure it's been almost 20 years now, so that cop is probably long retired, but still appreciate him giving me a ride. Crazy experience. Not a very satisfying ending to the story. Whatever. That is great. But damn it, that's my story. Perhaps it just isn't as wild as they come, and likely it isn't as lifting as some, and maybe it isn't as fair or as fine, But damn it, he whispered with passion. Dot. It's mine. Best one on here. A personal trainer at my old gym did this. He saw a guy shoot another guy in the head and jump into a car, so he got into a cab so the shooter wouldn't get away. The cabbie followed the car for a bit until he learned that he was following a murderer, then he pulled over and refused. Turns out, the shooter was an undercover police officer, who sped away because he thought the victim's friends would get to the scene before the cops. Unexpected plot twist. I suspect there will be a Reddit for that. Now I'm interested. My uncle has a similar story. He recently had his car stolen and was driving his GF's car when he noticed his stolen car driving around. He followed the car until it pulled up next to a house and did a drive-by. I believe someone was shot but lived. Needless to say, he no longer followed his car after that. Luckily he was on the phone with police the whole time. Undercover cop or not, if someone shoots someone else in the head, it's a murder. Edit. As a few have pointed out, technically it is a homicide, and not a murder. I learned something today. Thank you. The cabbie followed the car for a bit until he learned that he was following a murderer, then he pulled over and refused. Yeah, I'd say following a known murderer ranks at the top of the retardation list. Yes, but it's usually followed by I've always wanted to say that. I've always wanted to pull the opposite, there's no time to explain, get in. Still hadn't built up the courage. Ooh, I'm not a taxi driver, but I was the passenger for a story that is similarly cliched. Back when I was an active drug addict alcoholic, what's the difference? I know. I had a director threaten to recast me a week before the show if I was late to rehearsal again. To put that into perspective, recasting a major role after rehearsals have started is generally unheard of, and almost unthinkable so late in the rehearsal process. She was really fed up with me. On this particular day, I was running late as usual and had 5 minutes to get to rehearsal. It was a 10-minute walk or a 5-minute drive. I flagged a cab, hopped in and said, I need you to take me to this address and, if you can, I need you to step on it. The driver smiled wide and said, I've always wanted to hear that. Cue him putting the pedal to the metal. Within 10 seconds we were approaching 65 miles per hour on a 30-mile-per-hour city street, weaving through traffic, clipping yellow lights too close for comfort, and generally whipping this cab around in an extraordinarily haphazard and irresponsible fashion. I was stunned, wide-eyed, in absolute shock and terror, unable to process that he quite literally heeded my request or that this was actually happening. I thought I was going to die. It was the best cab ride of my life. I was 2 minutes early to rehearsal. I once had a similar experience, except the situation was that I had missed my alarm and woke up about 15 minutes before the flight was boarding. Got a cab and told him I needed to be at the airport as fast as possible and I would pay $50 in cash for the ride, about a $40 tip. I made the flight, but was certain I was about to be in a horrible accident the whole drive there. Taxi drivers apparently do not fear death. Not a taxi driver, but one time after a work party a bunch of co-workers and I were going to a different bar and we needed to take cabs. A few of us got into one and the rest in another. One of my co-workers told our cabbie, hey, if you can beat that other cab, I'll give you an extra $20. The cabbie smiled in the rear view and said, okay, buddy. He started weaving between cars until he got in front of the other cab. Then he perfectly timed it so he could get the other cab stuck at a red light while he just made it past. With that head start he had no need to really rush and he calmly got us to the bar first. I think he actually really enjoyed it and got a pretty nice tip for a short trip. Your co-workers and the other cab should have made the same offer to their driver. That would have made it a lot more interesting and dangerous. He could have just got on the radio and called out to the other car, I'll give you $10 to let me get there first. I had a fair jump in my car, who immediately started berating about my car, and how Uber does not allow drivers to use two-door cars. This came as a surprise to me, because I was not, and never have been, an Uber driver. I was just parked in front of the hotel waiting for a friend. This has happened to me twice. The second time the girl was so glued to her phone that she didn't even make eye contact. I let it roll for a couple seconds before I finally asked her why she was in my car. She looked up, wordlessly opened the door, and disappeared into the night. Really makes you think about how the world has changed when it's normal to pop into a stranger's backseat but weird to talk to them once you're in. Oh man. This happened in Pittsburgh not long ago. A girl jumped in a car she thought was an Uber outside a club at like 2 AM. The driver ended up killing her though. They don't have Reddit in jail, do they? Edit SE, not Pittsburgh, sorry. I'm full of shit. Not quite what OP asked, but almost. A colleague of mine, a UK police officer, was on foot patrol and saw a robbery in the distance where a driver was pulled from their car and the robbers drove off in their car. My mate did exactly as OP has said, stopped a civilian car and said follow that car. The driver apparently went wild trying to keep up with the robbers, all the time with a uniformed police officer in his passenger seat, giving a commentary to his base. They lost the stolen car, and my colleague asked his driver to stop. He got out and let the driver go without asking his details. As the driver went into the distance, my mate realized he'd taken out his peg, truncheon, in the car and left it on the dashboard. Luckily the driver rang in later and it was returned. No idea what happened to the robbers, stolen car or victim. Sorry. Peg, truncheon. Thank God you said truncheon because I was not about to Google cop peg at work. Not entirely related, but I once had somebody jump into my car and I wasn't even a taxi. I was driving down the street in Boston and was stopped at a red light, minding my own business. Suddenly, my passenger door flung open and someone climbed in. Completely shocked, I didn't even have time to react. For some reason it never entered my mind that I should be alarmed or concerned about this trespasser, so when I saw that it was an elderly lady I just remained calm. Without skipping a beat, she said in a thick Russian accent, "You take me home, please." So, I started driving. I asked where she lived but she just said keep going, I tell you when to stop. At that point it dawned on me that she probably had dementia and that she likely thought I was someone she knew, or maybe even a taxi. Nope. After a few minutes of conversation it was abundantly clear that this woman had simply picked the first car she saw, gotten in, and requested a ride. During the 10-minute car ride she asked about my life. I was in college studying psychology at the time, and when I told her this she said you make good psychologist, very nice boy. It put a big smile on my face. My grandparents had all died either before I was born or during early childhood, so I don't think I had ever had an elderly person say something like that to me. It felt nice. Finally we reached an apartment building and she told me to pull over. When I put the car in park she turned to me and said thank you driving me today. I assured her it was no problem at all and wished her the best, and her parting words to me as she climbed out were very good boy, good luck with studies. After pausing for a moment, I drove away and just kind of let it be. It was such a nonchalant and comfortable interaction that I resisted my temptation to immediately text friends to tell them what had happened. It felt like that would have cheapened it, or turned it into a novelty. It was just so natural and I went with it. She's unlikely to be alive at this point, but I hope she enjoyed the rest of her days. Godspeed, Russian grandma I had for a day. I had an elderly lady with a walker do that to me and a friend once. We got to the house and the people there were not surprised she'd gotten a random ride again. Little old ladies are completely fearless. My father was a taxi driver for quite a while. It never happened to him, for which he was eternally disappointed. He did, however, once get run over by his own car. Edit, adding story of getting run over due to popular-ish demand. Okay, so this was in the mid-90s, in southern England. Like many taxis of that vintage, he was driving a diesel Citroen BX. Also, like those cars, it had been driven into the ground. In any case, he was dropping off a little old lady at her house at the top of a hill. Being a gentlemanly sort, he helped her out of the back seat and escorted her around the front of the car. The handbrake cable snapped while they doing it, and the car began to roll down the hill. He pushed the lady out of the way and got hit. Car dragged him about 100 yards down the road before a guy out on a run was able to jump in and put his foot on the brake. He was mostly okay, had a pretty severe friction burn road rash down one of his legs and up his back. He had to have x-rays on his ribs too, but they turned out not to be broken or cracked. The little old lady threatened to sue, because in his haste to get her out of the way, he pushed her over and she broke a wrist. Old bones, presumably. Fortunately, the company's solicitor was able to head that off. Could make the case that he saved her life, I suppose. When I found out later, I'd have been 14 or 15 and I laughed my ass off. I mean, who gets run over by their own car? Didn't take long to realize how lucky he'd been, though. Seems like the little old lady still had a case. I mean, yes, she broke her wrist only because your father was saving her life, but she was only in danger because the taxi's brake malfunctioned, which would again fall on the taxi company. Glad he came out okay though. My brother's plumber managed to run himself over with his truck and told him his only thought was to roll so it didn't hit his head. Crushed his chest though. He has recovered thankfully. Not a cab driver, but once at port in Spain on deployment we were late in getting back to ship, so we jumped in a cab and said there's a good tip your way if you get us there before 10:30. We were there by 10:15 and it was the scariest car ride of my life. It was amazing. Wasn't a taxi and this kinda flips it around, but my partner and I had some guy take off on us on foot and we were chasing him down a semi-major road, but he was smoking us. Some random person in a minivan pulled over, yelled jump in and then dropped us off just in front of him. The guy was totally gassed by that point and just proned himself out on the ground when we jumped out. Seriously, was like something in movie. I feel like there's something I'm missing with this story. My partner and I had some guy take off on us on foot and we were chasing him down a semi-major road. I'm guessing you're cops? You were chasing a criminal? Some random person in a minivan pulled over, yelled jump in and then dropped us off just in front of him. Why didn't the guy just, like, run away from the street and leave you and your partner to come find him in the middle of the block off the highway, whatever place your fortuitous van can't get to? I drove you before a little while in New Orleans. Do not recommend. And immediately after dropping someone off in the French Quarter had a woman jump in the back with 6-inch bedazzled heels and yell follow that car. Turned out she worked at a local strip club and had left her phone in the car of a guy she wasn't keen to see again. Unfortunately we couldn't catch up to him, so I just took her back to her place of work. I'm actually a taxi driver, bike taxi pedicab. I was hanging out a corner when a co-worker of mine got a ride across the intersection. Suddenly a guy walks up to me and tells me to follow that cab, but keep a distance. This guy looked current or ex-military, demeanor, haircut, attitude. Has one of those earbuds like the agents from the Matrix. Exuded the vibe of being very professional, competent and not giving a fuck at the same time. So I was born for this moment. I read all the Tom Clancy books as a kid, all the books about spycraft during World War II and the Cold War, every spy movie ever made, etc. I kept about 100 yards distance and then would accelerate when they went around a curve anytime they were near a light or intersection. I have all the lights memorized, to ensure we would make the same light but a little later than they did. At one point a car pulls up alongside and another guy switches places with the original guy and we keep going. After about 12 blocks the pedicab pulls over ahead of us and the guy tells me to pull over. Hands me a $20 for a $12 ride, although I would have done it for free just to live my 9-year-old fantasy. Probably just local cops, but I can dream. I live in a fairly big city and drive a normal looking car. I have people get in all the time thinking I'm an Uber. When I tell them I'm not they usually apologize, but I had one person tell me I should have a sign. What? More importantly, you should lock your doors, my dude. Friend driving a cab had this happen once. It was college students out on the town and their friends got into a cab just prior to them. Yes, he chased it to wherever they went. Tipped him nice, he said. Very anticlimactic. Not a taxi driver, but when I was 18 driving home late at night in Seattle and I was rear-ended by a guy, and when I tried to call the cops from a payphone, it was 1992, he pulled a gun on me and told me to get in his trunk, so I knocked him down and ran, and luckily there was a cab sitting there at a red light, so I got to jump into it and yell, "Drive, just drive." He didn't hesitate, just took off. Dude stayed with me at the 7-11 until the cops came. I won't forget that. I was pretty shaken up. If you're out there reading this